Welcome to the Humanity Mosaic Podcast, exploring authenticity and connection with Dr. E. Thank you for joining us today as we explore issues that affect our relationships in today's world. And now welcome to today's episode with Dr. E.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you today. And of course, I have a fantastic guest who is going to come on in a few minutes. We are looking forward to having a really deep discussion today and exploring some of the ways that we are different and the same, and recognizing that in the Humanity Mosaic, what is important is that at the center, at the core of it, is love. Today's guest is going to be Alex Regan. Alex is the author of What Needs to Be Said, exciting new book, and I hope that if you haven't picked it up yet, you will. Alex is a interfaith minister, a speaker, and a transformative spiritual coach. Drawing from his personal journey of overcoming his evangelical Christian background and living into his authentic self and coming into the world as a trans man, Alex helps others heal from religious trauma, which is something that we'll be talking a bit about, and, and finding true spiritual freedom based on his work, Spiritual Liberation and the Enneagram. Alex offers a transformational journey in his narrative of liberation workshops. So what I want you to know is that the person who's going to be talking to us today has a story to tell, and it's one well worth listening to. Welcome, Alex Regan.
Thanks, Dr. E. I'm so excited to be here with you and talk today and just share the space with you. So thanks for having me so much.
Well, Alex, this is an interview that I have been waiting for a long time. Of course, we're friends and became friends by showing up in the same spaces together and having a lot of common interests. But I just felt like bringing you onto the podcast would be such an enlightening and enriching spirit. It's just discussion for our listeners to be able to learn from you who you are, how you came to be who you are, and of course, you know, the lovability that you have and that you spread with the world is something that I want everyone to experience. So my first question for you, Alex, is when I looked at the title, just the title of your book, What Needs to Be Said, the title right there is absolutely intriguing. So tell us a little bit about what the book is about and why you called it What Needs to Be Said.
Yeah, so I think part of the book is a memoir based on my upbringing, my story of growing up in an evangelical family that was pretty conservative out in the West. And just growing up in a family that, we loved church. We loved Jesus. We went to church. We did a lot of things in church. I did all the youth group functions, all the things. My parents did a lot of things in volunteering with the church. And so it's the story of that child that was brought up in that, which the child really loved that and enjoyed that. But also there was sort of this entanglement happening where I didn't feel like I was who they thought I was. So I was assigned female at birth. And everyone just thought that's who I was. And that was sort of the storyline I attempted to play, although very messily, I would say, because I really wanted to sort of always be me in those spaces. And so the memoir parts of the book tell a lot of the stories of the first part is the origin of my story. It later moves into the struggle, which goes into what really happened for me as I came out in my 20s and what happened over the next, I would say, roughly around 15 years of just the mess that sort of was left in the wake of that. It caused, as you might assume, it caused a lot of disruption and heartache and fractures and deep family issues and community issues. I left my church behind and most all of the people that I was friends with, that I had, grown up going to church with and loving that community with. And then the last part is the emergence, which is sort of as I began to do my own spiritual work and my own evolution from coming through being, recognizing myself as queer or even as a lesbian in my early years, and then coming through to realizing that I was actually trans and a trans man. So it's that part of my transition story. And also then how I ended up at an interfaith seminary on top of all of everything, after having left everything behind that had to do with religion and Jesus and Christianity, to kind of going into a place where I was really felt like I was an atheist. I didn't believe in anything, to how I found my way back to a version of God that felt different for me, what I call in the book, the God within. And just my process of that and how that all unfolded, and just kind of came to, obviously not quite present day because I finished it several years ago now at this point, but within the last few years. And built into it is also practices that I used along the way that helped me get better in touch with myself, heal some of the things from my origin, heal some of the things from my struggle, and practices that I both used myself, but also that I used with clients and workshops or in one-on-one sessions with people. And so it's kind of a workbook / memoir or self-development book in whole.
Well, it's amazing. And I really, really sincerely hope that many people pick it up and read it, because what happens so often is that we have these stories that we hear from other people who really have not gone through what you have been through to arrive at where you are today. And so it's like playing telephone. Someone knew someone who knew someone who knew someone. And at the end of it, they really have no idea of what is behind all of it, what the struggle is like, and what lies in the heart of someone who has gone through all that you've been through to find your authentic self. Alex, you know that I do a lot of work with people who are marginalized. And of course, the trans community is very much marginalized, not considered to be center of mass, so to speak, demographically. And as you made your way to finding yourself authentically as a trans man, what did you find when you landed in that space? Did you find a community? Did you find people who were welcoming and who accepted you? Or did you also feel marginalized even once you arrived at your authentic self?
That's a great question. I think it was a mixture of both but for the most part, I think the balance tipped sort of in my favor, that I really found a lot more community. I found a lot of the friends and people that were friends that I'd built over my 20s and 30s and into my early 40s, and in that whole range. I guess I began to transition in my late 30s. So the people I'd built sort of after the post-apocalypse of leaving church behind and leaving my family behind, really the majority of them went, oh, that makes sense. As I came out, there was really this realization like, oh, that seems way more like you. In fact, I even had some friends that were a few friends that I still knew from back in high school. And when they told their parents, who were some of the more conservative, people from our church, they even went, huh, that kind of tracks, So I think for a lot of people, there was this recognition that this just seemed like me. And it was really that did sort of shine through. I definitely have had some spaces where that wasn't the case. Unfortunately, my brother and I, who he never had problems when I had come out as gay before. It was just not something that bothered him. He wasn't upset about it. But when I came out as trans, it really, for some reason, even to this day, I don't know why, but it really bothered him a lot. And it has really fractured our relationship. And it's pretty much been non-repairable, unfortunately. Which is heartbreaking, because I wish I could figure out, how we could fix that, or what it would take to fix that. So, but for the most part, I mean, in places that I worked, places that I consult, places that I do coaching or do come in as guest speakers and things, I've had just so much support and people just really wanting to learn and understand, even how can I do better? How can I be better? And that has been uh like really uplifting for me, but it also has given me this space where I've seen humanity. We're not as bad always. We're probably not as bad or as good as we sometimes, make it out to be. And a lot of people really just don't understand. And when they have a chance to ask questions or have curiosity openly and not feel like they're going to get into trouble, there is this freedom that people go, oh, well, I guess I understand that a little better, and I want to support you. How else can I do that? And so I have had a lot of that space. So it hasn't been, societally, obviously, I face a lot of bigger obstacles that come my way. But in my communities and in my places of where I work, where I have friends, all those spaces, I've had the majority of just really good support from people, more support maybe than I've ever had in my life, honestly, I'd say right now.
That's just, that's heaven sent, I would say.
Agree.
To find yourself embraced and feeling supported. You mentioned that when people feel that it's safe to ask questions, or they they're curious, they want to understand, um, and it makes sense that many people would not understand. They don't understand how this even works, or how it happens, or how it can
Yep,
be real or true.
definitely.
What are a few of the questions that people point to you and begin to feel safe asking you?
I mean, I think some of it comes from, I've had a lot of parents of young kids ask me, hey, my kids are 11, 12, 13. How can I talk to them? Like, how can I be supportive in case they start to have feelings that look different than what I might have had growing up myself? And, I had one parent, sometimes I go into churches and I talk in their Sunday school and other places to the adults, not to about it. And, I had one parent say, well, kind of how would I know though? How's an 11-year-old going to know? And I said, is that your husband sitting next to you? And she said, yeah. I said, well, how did you know that you or him? How did either of you know that you were who you were? Did you know that you were a woman or a girl when you were 7, 8, 9, 10? And she went, well, yeah. And did he know that he was a boy? And he's like, yeah. I said, well, why would it be any different for me or anyone else? And they went, oh,
Oh,
right. Oh, and it's like a light bulb goes on. But it's just like when you don't have, because I was probably 6, I'd say, when I started to be. I remember my mom yelling at me because I had taken my shirt off in the front yard with my brother and some other boys in the neighborhood. We were just playing in the sprinklers. And my mom's yelling from the porch, you can't run around. Girls can't go outside without a shirt on. And I just kind of looked at them and looked at me and I was like, we're the same. What's different? My brain did not see us as being different, but she did. And so oftentimes it's just, we don't realize we assume children and younger teens and that don't know themselves. And the funny thing is we all did, right? The rest, we all knew ourselves, and we don't kind of afford that to younger generations. Sometimes as we get older, we think they don't know. So that's a question I get from a lot of parents. A lot of people, do want to know what my journey has been like. Like, how did I decide to come out? How did I decide, for instance, I take testosterone. People wanted to know, how did you come to that decision for yourself? I had top surgery of, 7, gosh, it's been 8 years ago now. And people want to know, how did you come to that feeling for yourself? And not so much, I think a lot of trans people, unfortunately, do get asked medical questions, and that's what can be annoying for people. And I always tell people, don't ask other people this, don't ask other people that you just happen to meet. But I like to open up spaces where it is a safe space. If I'm doing a workshop or I am speaking at a church, to say, you can ask me what's usually inappropriate, because I want you to understand sometimes I speak at university. I've spoken at university medical centers, and it's the whole room of doctors before. And so I just ask whatever you need to ask. I speak to social work and therapy students, who are going to be social workers. And I tell them, just ask the questions. I don't care what it is. Ask any of it, because I want you to know going forward. And so I think it's just any kind of curiosity of what might, like, how did your family react? People want to know. How did you deal with that? How did you deal with the losing sort of everything at times? And just also, I think people like to see, what does it feel like now to like be in your true self? Does that feel better? Does it feel different? A lot of people will say, oh, I've seen pictures of you when you were younger, and like you have a different like light in your eyes now. And, how does that feel? And, so people do ask lots of nice questions. Usually I rarely get an offensive question nowadays, or something that feels like beyond what they should ask. So.
Well, hopefully, as people are exposed to more of reality and more of the different dimensions of diversity and all the ways that we are similar and different, that those differences matter, and beginning to pay attention to it, when you can understand something, then you can take steps towards it. But when you don't understand, the fear gets in there, and the fear is an absolute obstacle to being able to move into understanding and relationship. So I just want to say thank you for being that person who is willing to answer those tough questions. I know what that feels like. But
I know you do.
Yeah, some of us just raise our hands and say, okay, there's no such thing as a stupid question. This is a safe zone to not know what you do not know, and I'll answer those questions. But as you were speaking about some of the questions that come to you, just looking back on your journey, and I cannot even pretend to say that I understand how difficult it must have been, because I don't know how difficult it was. I have an idea that it was definitely difficult. But what were some of the, what I would say, inflection points, or the sort of conversion moments where you knew that you were going to break through to another level? You didn't allow yourself to get stuck by the community, by the church, by your parents. Where were some of those points in your journey?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, sort of the first one I think of is, it was like the fall of my senior year of college. And that whole fall, I had just been so sick. Like I was always having stomach issues and headaches and jaw aches. It was like my whole system was telling me, you have got to come out to your parent. You can't live this way anymore. And I just kept, no, kind of fighting this internal battle with myself. And there was one night I remember I worked at this restaurant and bar, and I was just sitting at the bar with all my friends. We all were friends that worked there together. And I was just sitting there. And I just remember looking up at my good friend who was the bartender that night. And I just said, I have to go tell them, like, I just can't do it any longer. And I got in the car and I drove like the hour and 20 minutes down to where my parents were. I mean, I got there in the middle of the night, sort of snuck in the house with my key and went into my grandmother's old room and just went to sleep. I don't even remember how I could have slept, but when I came out in the morning, I scared my mom, because for the first time ever, I somehow snuck into the house. My mom was the type of mom who, it's like, she heard the key hit the lock and she was awake no matter what time it was. It was like, are you home? Kind of like, and not out of upset, but just, I'm glad you're home. She's a 2. So she is like, could feel my energy probably hit the door as we got on the porch. So I had never snuck in the house before ever. And that was funny to me. I thought, wow, how did she not hear me come in? And she said, honey, what are you doing here? You were just here a couple days ago. And it was just, that morning. So I told them, and it was as bad as I thought it was going to be, all the stuff. But when I got back that night, I drove back up to the to the restaurant and sat in the same seat in that bar. And even though it had been this like catastrophic explosion, there was just this part of me in my body that just felt so much relief of just like, at least now it's like, it's in the air. It's out off of my poor body that is just holding all of this in. And I'm an 8. So maybe the body type was just like, I was just weighed down by it, literally and just physically. And I do remember just feeling at least some sense of relief. Like, now it's done. Now we can like maybe try to let it heal, you know, at least if it's like when the break happens, that's you know, you can then start to let it heal. If it's not, you know, if it never was going to break and I was just going to hold it in, there was never going to be that other side of it. So I'd say that was the first space of that. And then another space of that was similar was when I got sober in January of 2013, January 2013. And in those first couple weeks, I thought I was going to die. You know, I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to make it through this. I don't know what, I just don't even know if I have the will to live. And one night I said, I have to go somewhere. I don't even care if it's a church. And boy, I was like, I must be bad if I'm over here saying I'll walk back in a church. And I found this little spiritual center in Alameda. I lived in Oakland. And the next morning I just got up and drove to the spiritual center and I walked in there, and it was, you know, essentially a church, but it was more spiritual and not so religious, as we might say. And the little minister that I met there ended up being someone who changed my life. You know, she just ended up being someone who held space for me, helped me through those first couple of months. And it was just like, I knew then that part of me I was gonna get through it. And it was just like, you know, and I've always had little moments like that just sort of tipped the scales, and I just was able, you know, to keep going. And, you know, I write in my book, you know, that there were times when I don't know how I just clawed and scratched and crawled my way through this life. Like I was just not even upright, but something always kept me going and kept me sort of moving towards something. And now I know and think it's because I was just supposed to tell my story and do the work that I'm trying to do in the world, and hold the space for people that I can hold, and really just honestly love the people that come into my space and my experience in the way that I can. So yeah, I think that's been some of those sort of tipping points for me.
Yeah, those tipping points are fascinating because you never forget them. And sometimes you forget to share them. Yeah. And, you know, in retrospect, when you look at the support, where it came from, in times and moments where you just didn't know what the next step would possibly be. And that's so encouraging because in reality, for most of us, there is always going to be the probability that the help that is needed is going to show up. We Definitely. Just have to be present enough to recognize it when it shows up. You know, Definitely. You mentioned that your mom was a 2 and that you're an 8, and we haven't talked about the Enneagram yet.
Yep.
And
yep.
Another thing that both of us love, the energies of 9 different personality archetypes, and yours is at 8, your mom's at 2, I'm at 1. I'm curious, and for people who do not know the Enneagram, which is I call it a psycho-spiritual tool for being able to actually find the blueprint to your soul, to find, you know, the energy that dominates within you, even though you have all 9 of these energies in you. But when I think about going through what you've been through, I know that I talked quite a bit in my book, No Justice, No Peace. I talked about all the different ways the Enneagram sort of showed up in my journey and how it still shows up in my life to help me to navigate bias and bigotry in any given moment. How did the Enneagram enter into your world, and was it helpful? Did it actually inform the trajectory of your journey?
I mean, most definitely. I mean, I had been, taking some little where I've like read something about it or heard something about it years ago, just like, ooh, this is fascinating. That's interesting, but never like really grabbed into it very deeply. And then I took a class with Dr. Robert Holden through my seminary, and I went, oh, there's something here. This is way deeper than I realized. And then not long after that, I took a class with you and Dr. Holden at my seminary. And then it really began. I think that must have been back in 2020 or late 2020, early 2021. And at that point, it just began to really click in. But I really couldn't find my number at first. I kept for a while, and you know this part. I thought I was a 2 because I look a lot like a 2 sometimes. My mom raised me really to be a 2. And then for a while I thought maybe I'm a 6, and I went around and we all do that. We all go through and look. And then it wasn't until, last October or so around this time that finally I was listening to a seminar that was Russ Hudson and Suzanne Stabile. And there was something about the way Russ was talking about the 8s. And all of a sudden I kind of went, huh. And I said to my wife, do you think, and she was like, do you think you might be an 8? And I was like, oh my gosh, I've been ignoring the 8 all along, like as if I just didn't hear any of the 8. Like, and it, for those who might not know about it, usually it's a joke within the Enneagram community that everyone hates their number except for 8s. 8s are usually like, I like being an 8. But for me, I think because of how I was sort of treated poorly as a assigned female child as an 8, which sometimes gets a bad rap, it was hard for me to like own the 8 and be confident about it and be like, this is useful to me, because I think I got kind of, I mostly got told to be quieter, be smaller, be littler, be less than for pretty much my entire life. So it took me a while to get to the 8 and to understand the benefits of it and how, it works for me. But as I dove deeper into that, and then I signed up to be in Suzanne Stabile's Enneagram cohort that's a whole year. And I got into that this year. And then I took another class from you this year and Catherine Bell. And then I joined Russ Hudson's Enneagram and Consciousness. So I've literally been on a nonstop whirlwind now of just taking more classes, reading more books, just I have 2 weekly groups that meet together now that are doing the work. And my wife is just as obsessed with it. And she is a 1. And so we have just had a life-changing understanding of how 1 and 8 work together and sometimes don't work together. And it's just changed my whole life. I mean, it's changed the way I see myself. Fascinating enough, part of what didn't sometimes resonate with the 8 for me is that, oftentimes when we talk about 8, we hear the 8 as like, as a child, maybe there was a vacuum of leadership, or there wasn't a parent that was really responsible. So the kid had to kind of raise themselves. And I was just like, gosh, that wasn't how my childhood was. My parents were very involved, maybe too involved at times. And what I've come to see is I like my soul must have been like, we need that 8 energy because we'll need it to go out beyond what they needed me to be. Because if I had been a 2, I probably would have just been, okay, guys, and kind of people pleased, or other numbers I might have just merged as a 9 or, etc. And so I think I needed that. I needed the bigness of the energy to say, nope, I have to go be me in this world. And so I need as big an energy as I can get to go and do that.
I can see that. That makes so much sense. And, I can see how you would have attached to point 2 based on sort of your early years and your upbringing. That's where the value was.
Yeah.
That's what you were socialized to be. But I love the way you express you needed that big 8 energy. And when you needed it, it was really there for
Yep.
you. And it helped you to land in your authentic self, and
Undoubtedly.
that's the journey. That's the
Yep.
journey to be able
Yeah.
to actually land in the space of who we were created to be and to have the comfort and the curiosity to continue to grow, because there's no growth inside the comfort zone, but
Nope.
to know that you're growing from a place of truth, of
Yep.
wholeness, of what is really real, and not growing from a place of constantly creating these new versions of yourself.
Exactly.
So yeah, the eight energy makes a lot of sense, and
Yeah.
I'm grateful in this moment, as I am whenever we get down to the core of what's going on with someone, that you were born or predispositioned to be an eight,
Yeah.
because that strength did allow you to finally land where you find yourself now. So
Definitely.
switching the conversation up a little bit, only because we know that winter holidays are coming. Thanksgiving is going to come, and Christmas, and all the things that are celebrated over the course of the winter.
Yes.
And with your journey, I'm going to make an assumption that there will be some visiting that takes place during the holiday season. Would that be true?
I mean, in all honesty, it's been quite a while since I've seen most of my family around the holidays. I think it's been at least since maybe 2017 or 18 since I've seen any of my family at the holidays. And before that, it had been a good number of years as well. Um, Now I live out on the East Coast, and before I lived out west, and I was closer to where my family was, so it was a little easier for me to. It's sort of often been on me to go home, um, and we did live about a day's drive apart from each other for a while, and so they did come and visit Doris and I before when we lived in Arizona before we got out to the East Coast here, but it's been a long and tenuous thing. I went home in 2019 to a family funeral, and it was the first time I saw my entire family sort of on both sides and all the extended people and all the things. And it was a lot of how do I put this? A lot of just sort of passive aggressive energy of just like, oh, like okay, and just kind of walking away after I was like, oh, I go by Alex and he and him, and then ended up in an actual fight with my brother, unfortunately that night, and all of my cousins were there too, and so for me, the holidays, I mean, I've spent most of the last, gosh, now it's been to age myself, the last 27 years since I was, in college, I guess, or 24 years, just creating family of choice, creating family with other people and their parents along the way. I was really fortunate enough to find a lot of great friends who had wonderful parents who sort of just welcomed me into their homes over all of the years. And I never was without some form of like parental, uh, people that weren't my biological parents, obviously, but that were someone's parents that I loved. I never was without that in all of the years since I came out. So I came out in 2000 essentially. And so in all these 24 years, I have never been without that in some fashion. And now, thankfully, we live very close to Doris's mom, and we spend our time with her. And she's pretty sweet. She usually tells me, "I'm your mom now," and so that has been pretty fantastic and amazing to be married into her family and have that energy. But yeah, it's a hard. Holidays are such a hard space for most of the queer community because it's just a lot of times if you do go home, you might be expected to. I was often expected to go to church with them, and then that was often very awkward. And it's really awkward to see my family now because my parents unfortunately still struggle with calling me my birth name and she and her pronouns. So that gets really complicated when you have a beard and your voice is this deep now to be in public places and then have them refer to you as a girl's name and she and her. So it begins to be very complex and complicated, and it's kind of it's a slippery slope of how do you navigate this now? How do you be in communion with one another when it's this, complex?
Very true. Very true. I often am put in the position of um, giving someone guidance who has to go home over the holidays, or they know that it's going to be difficult, they know it's going to be uncomfortable. And what I usually share is, remember, there is such a thing as family of choice. There are people who love and accept you exactly the way that you are. And another thing that I find, to speak to the pronouns, which people of my generation just seem not to be able to get it at all. I
It's
sometimes
hard.
I just sometimes laugh. There's a comedian, Wanda Sykes,
Yep.
who makes she makes a beautiful point where she says, if somebody keeps telling you that their name is George, stop calling them Charlie. It's just a matter of respect. But I do understand the struggle. I have one of my children identifies as non-binary, and the pronouns are they, them. And we talk about it all the time. And I must say that one of the things that I found very helpful was when they looked at me struggling with the pronouns in order to be able to be respectful and to understand their particular journey. Um, they looked at me and said, "You're my mom. You can call me whatever you want. You have a lifetime pass." And that touched my heart so deeply that it made me want to try even harder. It's like we left room for grace on both sides. It was, I understand that you gave birth to me as a girl, and now I identify as non-binary, and the pronouns may be, it may take you a minute. I've got it now. I'm good. But I do say to people all the time that navigating that journey, leave the space for grace on both sides. And that way, maybe both sides can actually begin to authentically try to get to a place of understanding and love each other enough to do that. And, what would you say to anyone who has to go, and maybe this is, the first holiday back home after coming out, or after the transition, surgical hormones, anything that is going to be much more obvious that I've entered into a different place than you recognize me in. What advice would you give to anyone out there who's, maybe reluctant to go home because they don't want to have to deal with intrusive questions or uncomfortable moments? What might be helpful?
I mean, I think one of the things you just said, a big part of it is giving each other grace and the space to just, I think a lot of times there's this great book. I think it's called The Persuaders. He talks about this part where he says we have to have more on ramps, because if we just have one on ramp, that's why we get a traffic jam, And so if everyone's just expected to get on this one ramp right now, it's a lot of people in one little space to fit in, and it does take time to adapt. And I think there is the need to have the space and the leeway. And I actually love thinking, that warmed my heart that your child said, I know they're a grown adult, but said to you, they're still your child, said, you know, you have a lifetime pass, because it actually gives me a pause in my heart, because I have quit, you know, correcting my parents. I don't, it's like I would be correcting them day and night if I corrected them. So I'm like, whatever. But I did recently say to my mom, I'm sorry that I didn't hold the space more for you and the pain you had around losing your daughter and losing the dreams that you had for that child and the hopes of a wedding and children and all the things that we put on our children and dream about. And not in a mean way put on, but just we do that. We dream about. And so, you know, I would have loved 8 or 9 years ago to have had the wherewithal to say that to her then, and I didn't and I couldn't, but now I can.
Yes.
And so I do think that part of it is it's a journey. Like all of this whole thing is a journey. There's no, you know, destination. Like that's another thing that needs to be said. You know, spoiler alert, you're not getting to somewhere. You know, there isn't some end point that we all get to and then go, oh, great. Okay. It's all, I've accomplished it all, or I've done it, or it's, you know, it's like, it's good or it's bad or all the things. Instead, it's just a journey. It's a process. And every step of the way, it's just like the one more right step in the right direction, you know, towards, I think, honestly, back towards that wholeness, right? Towards love, towards that we're all more alike than we care to realize. And yes, we have all these amazing little intricacies that are different about us, whether it's our Enneagram number, the color of our skin, our gender, our sexual orientation, our culture, our religion, you know, it goes on and on. And yet we are also all connected at the essence level.
Yes.
And I kind of love that about the Enneagram is like, once you start to look at all of the top levels of the healthiest parts of the numbers, they start to look the same. And like, that's the same thing with us at our, if we tap into love and grace and the kindness, self-compassion, compassion for each other, it all starts to look so much more the same and not so different. And so I think that would be a great thing to just offer grace and kindness to yourself, because it's going to be hard and frustrating for you probably, and also to whoever you have to be around in your family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that you're giving that advice, because we know there are people who are going to struggle. And whatever we can do to have people return to the home base of love, if we can all return there, then the conversation, the actions, the behaviors, they're very different when they're done from a place of love than when they're done from a place of right, wrong, good, bad, you know, either or.
Yep.
We really have to recognize that there is a lot of both and in this world.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it, and it's one of the reasons that I love the illustration of a humanity mosaic, because we all have our distinct ways of showing up in love, in the beauty of who we truly are. Alex, can you share with our listeners some programs that you have going on and how they can find you?
Yeah. So you can find me at my website is just www. Oh, you got it right here, alexregan.com. And I am about to start. I'll probably be in the start of the year. I'll probably roll out. I'm going to roll out a new workshop called The Narrative of Liberation, which is going to be a little teaser of that, is kind of some Enneagram stuff woven into it. And then also working with this, you know, I think what we're struggling with, and this is sort of the spiritual liberation part for me, is that we believe in this God that's sort of the ego God, is what I call him, the like all punishing sort of Santa Claus guy in the sky who's like, you know, making a list and checking it twice to see how bad we were. And a lot of us are caught up in that belief system around God. People who have religious trauma, even if you weren't raised in a religious atmosphere, our country is pretty rife with sort of this sort of Christianity is what it's been called. But obviously there are healthier forms of Christianity as well. But so just processing through some of that, some of the false beliefs and false narratives that we have around that, kind of tying in the Enneagram with that, and then learning to rewrite some of those stories, learning to have a different observational point for ourselves and where we can sort of zoom out and look at things with a new lens. And I like to try to tie into that the Enneagram, I think, if we really can look at all of our motivations, I think ultimately for me, it seems to tie back in to God in some way. Like that my wife will say, I know I'm trying to be good enough and perfect as a one so that God thinks I'm good enough and perfect, and so I want to play with all of that more and really dive into that more deeply and give people, like I said earlier when we were talking about the Enneagram, it's already been such a gift for me, and I just love it. And I've seen people's lives changed from it, my own and other people. And so I really now I'm excited to weave that into more of my work. And I also am going to do some work. I've started rolling out some stuff working with couples, and also it can just be a relationship. So it could be, best friends. It could be an adult child with their adult parent, and stuff like that, where we're working through some of the Enneagram and just relationship stuff. Because again, I almost really am to the point where I don't even want to just work one-on-one anymore. I want to work either with two people in that kind of relationship dynamic stuff, or work in the bigger workshops, or, preaching or teaching in larger environments. Cause it's just, there's too much good stuff to be said.
Right. Absolutely. It sounds like you're following in my footsteps. I feel exactly the same way.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I stopped practicing as a psychotherapist with a private practice, because it made so much more sense to be working with people in connection and in community with one another, whether it's just one person with another person in partnership, or, a larger segment of society. But Alex, this has been absolutely just so heart-filling. And of course, I knew it would be. I'm looking forward to not only people reading your book, What Needs to Be Said, because people need to listen to what needs to be said, but also looking for, as a fellow Hay House author, more books coming from you in the not too far distant future. And of course, we will eventually do something together, because we're just too good together not to.
Right. I agree.
Thank you so much for being my guest today. And what I would love for you all to do is to be sure that you check out all the links that we provided for you so that you can find Alex and Alex's work. And just remember, anyone who feels like they're going home around the holiday time, maybe struggling, that there's always a way to find the love that is always still there. You just have to mine a little deeply for it. And it begins with you, not with the other person. It begins with you. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Humanity Mosaic Podcast with Dr. E. For more information, please visit DeborahEgerton.com, and be sure to check out theAuthenticSelfCommunity.com to continue your journey.